A short notice. My name is Dr. Roma of the Kapihan and Social Chapter in Filipinas, and we're here together with our host, no other than Senator Joey Lina, a media man himself, no? Host of the long-running show Sagot Ko Yan, ABS-CBN, and today we would like to try to answer that question. As you have seen in our media advisory, is this government, is the new government inheriting a quote-unquote bankrupt government? What can we do about it, So, Seth, let me just give a briefer of the current situation. The Philippines right now has a standing debt of 13 trillion pesos as of 2022. In the 2 years of our lockdown, we have borrowed around 3.2 trillion pesos for obvious reason that we need the money for the public response. Recently, the Department of Finance has proposed a fiscal consolidation and resource mobilization plan. And they have some recommendations for the incoming government. So practically, the DFA is saying that the next government should more or less get more loans or cut the spending and probably improve taxation. So this morning we're going to discuss options on how to address this particular issue. Let me give the floor to our host.
Can you introduce first our guests?
Okay. With us today, on my left is a distinguished gentleman, a banker, and he's also the former president of the Philippine Nickel Industry Chairman Association. He's also an environmentalist, and he's much engaged in what we call the bamboo economics. And he will explain later on how the environmental group can also help in this particular problem of cash-strapped government. Of course, a man we don't need introduction.
You have not introduced first the one on the left.
Yeah.
You have not named the one on the left.
He is Mr. Alcantara. Sorry.
Okay.
And the next guest, of course, is our famous congressman, Congressman Edsel, Lagman, a man na hindi na kailangan introduce pa. Next is a good friend of the Philippines. He is the president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Canadian Chamber of Commerce, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Mr. Julian Payne.
Julian Payne.
Payne in French.
Payne.
Payne. Then?
Okay, actually there are two questions we want our resource persons to answer. One is the government, does the government have the capability to pay our loans on a yearly on a yearly basis? And it's a very practical and direct question. And if today, what are the things that we have to do? Do we raise taxes? Do we just allow the economy or encourage or help the economy to grow? As what the incoming finance secretary said, that actually we can pay the loans. The outgoing secretary says we have to do a lot of fiscal consolidation and resource mobilization. That means imposing new taxes and so on and so forth, canceling or suspending the trade, part of the trade law, which lower corporate taxes and also individual income taxes. And the other question that we would like, especially Congressman Edsel Lagman to answer, and also the other two resource persons to answer, Butch and Mr. Julian Payne, to help answer, is whether the Public Service Act amendment, which is now a law, but the IRR is still being formulated by the concerned agencies. There are questions regarding the constitutionality of the amendments to the Public Service Act, and in particular, Congressman Edsel Lagman. We would like him to answer that question too. What his group will do, he himself will do with regard to this impending implementation of the amended Public Service Act. But let's focus on the first question. The question is very clear. It is addressed to our resource persons. Alam mo, kahit malaki ang utang, kung may kapasidad ka naman magbayad, ay walang problema yun. And that's a very simple proposition. But kaya ba natin bayaran itong utang na ito? At kung kaya, paano natin babayaran? Yes, Congressman.
Joey, at the start, let me underscore that the new government is not inheriting a bankruptcy. According to the National Treasurer, the government is in good balance, which means to say we are not in red. But the problem with the PBM stimulus package is that it could not rely anymore on the 2022 national budget, because 90% have been comprehensively released to the departments and agencies, including the 8 billion for the budget for the barangay and SK elections. Consequently, the government will have to create new funds or search for new funding sources. According to the Constitution, the stimulus package, which is a special appropriation or supplemental appropriation, there has to be funds to be certified by the National Treasurer or a new revenue measure to be proposed in such stimulus package. Unless, of course, the stimulus package will be delayed in order that it will be embedded in the 2023 national budget, in which case there is no need to comply with the constitutional restriction.
If the funds had already been comprehensively released to the various departments, these expenditures for the rest of are these expenditures for the rest of the year, or are there still expenditures that cannot be funded anymore?
Well, I think the national budget for 2022 is fully funded. And the amounts released are still being utilized by the agencies and departments concerned. There may be a balance of about 10%, but these are what is known as mandatories, like for pension, salaries, and economic fund, which are untouchable. They cannot be alive because they are monopolies. That's why there is need to really search for new funds or create new funds.
So the problem is with the stimulus package, is that what we're saying now? For 2022, there is sufficient funds even to pay for our loans.
Yes, that is already part of the 2022 General Operations Act, and incidentally, a big portion of the loans on debt service are automatically appropriated. This is way back during the time of the late President Ferdinand Marcos, and until now, that automatic appropriation of debt service is appropriated.
Okay, so ang problema lang talaga natin, ito stimulus package. How much is this stimulus package that is being discussed?
Until now, Senator Joey, they have not disclosed any specific amount. All they were pointing at this time is the 8.4 billion for the barangay and SC elections, which they would like to postpone. But there are many sectors, including myself, I am against any postponement because we should not prejudice the democratic process at the grassroots and the youth levels. And even the government is resisting the postponement. The funds are already released, they are already preparing for it. Much of the amount have been allocated for supplies and other preparatory matters for the village and youth leaders election.
One last question to Congressman Edsel before we ask Butch and Julian here. The statement that the funds are available for 2022 for all the things that are included in the budget. I'm a bit hesitant to accept that statement because definitely the revenue collection dropped this 2022. And it has been discussed that there has been a reduction in the collection of taxes, both by the customs and by the internal revenue. Are these reports not true? And therefore, it's correct to say that the funds are available for 2022 when the assumption, when the 2022 budget was discussed in 2021, there are certain assumptions that certain revenues will have to be collected. Are you saying, Congressman Edsel, that the estimated revenue collection was achieved, including the foreign borrowing? Of course, 2021 also included borrowings by government.
This is not the first time that there is a revenue shortfall, but that would not be affecting implementation of the national budget because the government would have resources like foreign borrowings in order to implement the national budget. And possibly there might be an increase in the budgetary deficit because we will be spending more without the necessary revenues from income taxes. That is why, according to the incoming Secretary of Finance, there is need to improve our tax administration. And what would be included in the improvement of tax administration? One is improving the tax collection efficiency of the government. Two, plugging the loopholes in the tax system as well as rationalizing the reduction of more tax exemptions, catching the tax evaders, and also to most probably improve the tax to the gross domestic product ratio, which is now at 80%. That's still good enough. But it is lower than the Asia Pacific average of 21%, and the OECD average of 33.8%, something in that area, 30.8%. So we will have to improve that. That is a challenge to the new government. And also we have to reduce our deficit. It is now in the vicinity of 7.46%. The target is to lower that to 3%, which is the pre-pandemic level. And also, we must address the problem of smuggling, because that will eat up the tax collection by about 250 billion annually. 250 billion annually. And that's a huge amount. And also the effect on the local revenues would be disincentive if we have smuggled goods, as well as there are now smuggled farm goods and products, which will also be a disincentive to the farmers. And we will have to protect our consumers from the substandard smuggled goods. So these are all problems which the government will have to admit and address.
Mr. Congressman, follow-up question. Earlier, I stated that the Department of Finance, the DOF, recommended three, or probably mentioned three possible options this government or the next government will have. Basically, more loans, cutting spending, and of course, you're talking now about taxation. What can you say about the first two recommendations?
Well, let me go to cutting of spending. I think that is not recommendable because government has to spend in order to generate development. And with respect to the residue taxes, I think at this early stage of the new administration, that may not be allowed. So the last recourse, most probably, would be to borrow someone. But there should be cautious because there is a tolerable limit on the amount of debt stack compared to the gross domestic product. So these are all concerns which the new government would have to face. And I am joining the chorus of praising the new team of respected and experienced economists. However, I think the President Marcos Jr. should be able to heed the advice of Fiscal and implement the policies to be put forward by the time.
Butch, same line of questions. Please comment on the original questions that have been asked, and then you can also add your input.
I strongly agree with Congressman Lagman that the government is not bankrupt, far from it. In fairness to the Duterte administration, they've actually done quite well. The pandemic has slowed down. The last quarter, I think, saw a 8.3% GDP growth, which portends a strong recovery. They have achieved the most comprehensive tax reforms that should propel growth. So tax increases should not be the case. The greatest expansion in the U.S. economy occurred during Ray Reagan, who put out the biggest tax cut. And during the Clinton administration, the first thing he did was have a stimulus package that got the U.S. out of recession. So growth is the answer. Even the maligned debt numbers is still understood when compared to other countries. Some of the most progressive countries have way more debt than us. Japan has a 266% debt to GDP ratio. Singapore has 131%. The United States has 128% debt to GDP. So we actually have room at 65%. Our debt to GDP is only 65%. So there is room to grow. I think private businesses grow from small businesses to very big businesses. I was a banker to the brother of Senator Joey. He started the few trucks. Now he's a billionaire. So growth is the answer. Provided, of course, you use your debt money judiciously and no leakages. Not that much leakages. So taxes increasing is out of the question. We should emphasize growth. This is where the first moves of President BBM seem to be very hopeful and encouraging. You know, his Philip Medalla was my professor in college. The appointment represents what John Kennedy called the best and the brightest, I think, in terms of the economic thing. They had good track records, spotless, and none of them have ever been accused of any scandals or scams. They are very hardworking. And to me, the most important thing is BBM did not consider political payback in appointing these people. These people do not seem to have any political meaning, which is very important. So I think that's going to happen. The other thing that I notice is that, not because I'm Ilocano, but BBM seems to have a good instinct and a grasp of understanding what can turn the economy around in the quickest possible time, using our most abundant resources. I heard in YouTube, one of his statements was, we have to increase agriculture by using industrial plantations and reviving the Industrial Forest Management Act, which provides for large-scale agricultural projects. Agriculture is the biggest sector of the economy, and 30% of the total employment force is agriculture. He also said responsible mining. Mining is only 1% of our GDP of 13 trillion. Canada and Australia, the most environmentally friendly mining companies, 10% of their GDP is mining and mining related. Can you imagine that? If we grow the mining to only 5% of GDP, that's about 750 billion a year. Even if BBM increases it by only 1% a year, we will achieve the 7% GDP growth, which is the benchmark to jump from underdeveloped to developing countries under the OECD. So there is hope. And I noticed that not many people paid attention to us, but if you go Google it, he made that statement. So he knows, because agriculture and mining are one of our most abundant resources. You know, we have 9.67 million hectares of agricultural land, of which we are using only 5.6 million hectares. 4.25 is dedicated to food crops, the rest to sugar, coconut, etc. So we have 4 million hectares to go. In mining, our total land area is 30 million hectares. Mineralized land is 9 million hectares. We only have 3% devoted to mining. That's only 270,000 hectares. And we are the 5th most mineralized country in the world. In the 60s and the 70s, the pillars of the economy, mining, agriculture, sugar, coconut. And we have fallen by the wayside. So there is so much room for mining to improve. Because, again, like Canada and Australia, that is the main driver of the economy. Mining today provides 1.2 million direct and indirect employment. If you increase that by 5% or 5 times, you're talking about 5 million new jobs. So the potential is there, and I think the president-elect has good instincts when he said that he either has studied it very well, or has good instincts, or maybe both. So that's why some of my friends in the industry are very, very hopeful. You have a potential speaker who is one of the great mining families in Martin Romualdez, and if the president says he will promote responsible mining, I think we will be able to craft some laws. Now, the other problem that we have on the debt, like I said, we have room to grow. The lowest debt among the big countries is China, only 50%. But they have achieved so much. I don't know if the Public Service Act is one where they have allowed 100% capital for telecoms, etc. Our problem is lack of capital. It's a good business, no offense meant, but a lot of our capital is going to malls, casinos, and resorts. If you go to North Triangle, the buildings are going there, you need only about 500 billion to start a new mining company, drilling, exploration. Most of those buildings are 3-4 billion buildings. But domestic capital is lacking. Indonesia just passed a law, which I think the new government should look at. They are going to allow 100% in big revenue generating activities like mining. But there is a time-bound limit. Within, I think, 5 or 10 years, these foreign 100% owned companies should divest part of the capital. They can either list in the stock market or bid it out to locals so that they go down. Because our Constitution says we only have 40% for this. But if we can allow what they call, I was talking to an American lawyer, Canadian lawyer in Canada, and he was saying they describe it as instead of open-close, close-open, open-close. Open it up, the capital will come in, develop it, make a lot of money, then let the Filipinos benefit as the equity is being distributed and sold out. It does not disadvantage Filipinos. You know, all the capital going to these other activities, if they want, they can put their money where their mouth is and go into this. Now, my last point is, what new industries can be developed? When I was in mining, when I used to go to the mountains, it breaks your heart. The people have nothing there, no government services, they subsistence fishing, they eat field grass, etc. No medical, but their lives improve because of mining. And the question that a principal shareholder of the board that we were discussing is, what do we need when the mining stops? And this was the concern. So I took a look at it. I discovered that bamboo industry is very big. One, bamboo industry globally is a 61 to 70 billion dollars industry. China has 30 billion, 35 billion of that. They employ 10 million people directly, production value of 30 million, 4.2 million hectares to bamboo. If you only reach 10% of that, of 400,000 hectares, production value is about $3 billion, which is almost equivalent to the output of nickel, gold, and copper. And we have all the land available to go into bamboo. So, plus, based on the topic today, bamboo releases 38% more oxygen than other species, and it sequesters 12 tons of carbon every year. So it's not only going to be a major economic contributor, but it's one of the best to enhance the environment and come up with clean air, climate mitigation and clean air. One of the most surprising things I discovered, Senator, is, and I had to check, but I saw it in the DNR website. Manila has the highest pollution because of cars. The website has been confirmed there are 47,000 hectares under the control of DNR, A and B lands in Metro Manila. Can you imagine if you all plant that to bamboo, the effect on the pollution control? So those are the things. It's easy to talk statements of motherhood, but there's a reason you have CEOs and CEOs. There must be CEOs, COO types in government who will implement the plan, execute it. That's what's important.
Thank you very much, Woods. Maybe we should hear first from Julian. His comments on the discussion.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here. I'm coming to this from the point of view of one who basically was trained in economics, understood economics, which is a very deep Keynesian economics, and secondly, from the Canadian Treasury Board, which is equivalent to your part of budget management. First of all, I think we have to address this issue right on. Is the country bankrupt? No. In fact, when we hear of trillions of dollars of debt, when we think of it in terms of our own household budget, we get scared. But in fact, the level of debt in this country is not excessive compared with other countries, as we've said. And generally, in macroeconomic theory, during times of peace and prosperity, you pay down your debt. And during times of war, depression, things like that, you incur debt. And we look at this country historically, up until the pandemic. In fact, the country was paying down its debt quite rapidly. During the pandemic, we incurred more debt, obviously, and now the pandemic is over, one would expect us to start reducing the debt. Now you can reduce debt two ways, as a proportion of GDP. You can reduce it in absolute terms, or you can reduce it as a proportion of GDP. And it reduces a proportion of GDP if you increase your GDP. You don't just have to reduce debt per se. That's a fundamental issue. So basically, as I last saw the figures, we're between 65 and 75% of GDP. 65. Yeah, that's quite good compared to most countries. It's quite good. It's not good, but it's quite good compared with others, and we should be able to pay that down. So the second question is, how can you pay it down? And as we've said, you can pay it down by increasing taxes, you can pay it down by reducing expenditure, or you can pay it down by growth, which generates increased taxes without increasing the rates. Now, if you look at economically, if you look at increasing taxes or cutting government expenditures, one way or the other, you're cutting consumption. When you cut consumption, you cut the volume of taxes that you're generating. So you may increase the rate of taxes, but the amount of net revenue you get is not necessarily increased. So I think that Governor Ben Yoko, his point about we really need to generate growth is the key path to success. And if you look at the starting point of this country, its debt to GDP ratio, it's not ideal, it's not terrible. If you look at the reserves, you've got in order of, I think, 10 months of import reserves. This is very good compared with most countries. We're not about to suddenly stop. So the real question is, how do we stimulate growth? And how do we avoid stifling growth, which you may well do if you increase taxes or if you decrease expenditure? And that's where you get into the third question which has been raised, which is what are the sectors where we can really stimulate growth and how can we do it? And obviously agriculture is one, and obviously manufacturing is one, and obviously mining is one. These all generate growth. The real problem is how do you get investment? There's lots of local investment, but you need foreign investment, not just for the hard bucks. You need it for the technology it brings to, and you need it for the links it establishes on which trade grows. And I think that the danger in many countries is protectionist forces, and it's true here in agriculture, and there's an anti-mining. If you look back, there's reasons why this exists. But in this day and age, we've moved on. There is quite a well-developed technology for mining now, which is environmentally responsible. We can talk about clean air later if you want. And we can move towards socially and environmentally responsible mining. And we can move towards more efficient agriculture. And these are the areas we really need to focus on to generate growth. And that growth will generate taxes, far more taxes than increasing the tax rate. That's the key point. And so I think what the Congressman said is quite correct. We're not bankrupt. What we face is a technical problem of how do we manage basically the revenue and expenditure flow. Like in my house, I have to manage my cash flow. My wife spends all this. Oops, I didn't make that much money. How do I manage this week's cash flow? And I think that the Congressman has pointed out that there are technical issues that we have to face, but these are issues not of fiscal management per se, the issue of budgetary management and how technically you address that without stultifying the people.
Yeah. Then the current Department of Finance and the incoming Department of Finance seems to agree with both you, Julian and Butch, about the issue on mining. As a matter of fact, the incoming Finance Secretary, Jokno, was quoted in saying that the industry of mining can be a possible solution for the financial woes of this government, you know. And it seems that one of the major obstacles of the industry of mining is the environment. Let me ask Mr. Butch Alcantara here, who is a banker. He's also exposed into mining, but he's an advocate of the environment, particularly his bank economics. Butch, how can you more or less address this prime obstacle of the issue of environmental impact on the activity of mining?
In fairness to my friend, Gina Lopez, whom I did not agree on a lot of things, not all miners are saints. She brought out the problem. But you cannot make perfect the enemy of good. You have to have a balance between mining and environment. It can be done. Believe it or not, in the boardrooms, I was in mining as the president of a holding company. We do discuss how to make sure that the environment is maintained and enhanced and hopefully restored. We try to maintain it as much as possible. So, the miners are conscious of the environment. Now, I think I am the pioneer in advocating bamboo for mining. I think Julian knows that. My real reason when I look at this is how to make a sustainable livelihood for miners. That was the first, not the environment. Bamboo has 100-year life. Like I said, it releases 38 or more oxygen. And I surveyed one mining company, which is normally around 5,000 hectares. 25% in this company, outside the mining area, is susceptible to planting bamboo. And I took a look at the Institute of Network of Bamboo at the time, and confirmed by some UP professors, Dr. Aida Lafi, they can make 92,000 per hectare in a bamboo farm. In China, they allocate 10 hectares per family. They can make almost $1 million versus a salary of 240,000, 300,000 a year. So it really enhances the life and the dignity of the miners and the indigenous people communities. Plus, you know, of the 31 billion production value of China, they're now making anything from toys, engineered wood, wood beams, to composite products like wind turbines. The ones in Ilocos Norte of the president-elect, they can make that out of composite carbon and bamboo. That is a very strong metal. Even they're now making 6 to 8 feet diameter tubes for water or sewage. So the thing is, you cannot stop at planting bamboo. You will have to invite investors to put up the processing plants. That's why it's important, as has been reviewed by the legislator. We have to put in place the means where we can invite foreign capital, equity, so that we don't increase our debt further. And believe me, one Kapihan I used to work before, he held up, we were talking about multinationals, and he held a 1,000 peso bill. And said, you know, these foreigners, when there's money to be made, they come here. But, he said, there must be stability. So, regulations have to be more stable. In Chile, which became a developing country due to mining, the largest copper mine in the world, if you look at their mining laws, mine tenements almost have property rights. This did not come from me, but it's something I heard. You can't have somebody invest hundreds of millions of dollars when they're afraid. No offense to the Catholic Church, I hear mass every day. But it cannot be that when the bishop wakes up on the wrong side of the bed, he will say, we got to stop, we got to protest and stop mining. So stability is the key to luring capital. And I think Congress can, whatever they say, I trust the collective wisdom of the legislature to come up with the proper measure.
Butch, do you have an environment secretary in mind?
I've been a political.
I'm just kidding. But you need a very good environment secretary as well. No?
Because the two drivers
who understands what you're talking about.
The two drivers, Senator, can really propel us is agriculture and mining, which is the Department of Natural Resources. So that's why that is important. But I never, even if I'm from Ilocos and I idolized the president when I was young, the father, I never been political.
Okay. We will, yes, no. We will ask the members of the media to also shoot questions after maybe another round of question and answer.
What I'm getting here at this point in time is basically mining could be a possible major solution to the financial needs of the next government. However, there is this scary thing about mining, particularly the environmental impact of exploring and going full-scale mining to generate enough money for the country. What you're saying right now, Butch, is mining and the environmental aspect of protecting the environment can go hand in hand. And you are now saying at this point in time, you are even forwarding a specific mitigating solution to help control the environmental impact of mining. And you're saying bamboo could be a particular key, an agent that we could probably inject into responsible mining. Am I right?
Definitely. Well, the mining company that was owned by the holding company when I was president never had a notice of violation by the DNR, which means that everything revolves people. Again, I said, not all miners are saints, but I think the brouhaha that Gina created has really forced mining companies to comply. And it can be done. Enforcement can be done. It can be imposed stricter regulation. So, plus, if you look at we have only 270,000 hectares in mining out of 9 million mineralized land and out of 30 million hectares. So, it's confined. It can be confined because mining areas are selected only in confined areas. So, we can really do now. And bamboo, the visa I am advocating, is a very good mitigant and can be a major contributor to the economy. I lived in Vancouver for a while, and Canada is pristine. And British Columbia, where Vancouver is the mining capital of Canada. It's very environmentally maintained, beautiful place. So we can do it here. In fact, the Philippines has adopted the towards the TSM, which is the Canadian standard. If you implement that strictly, it can coexist. So there's no problem, I think, as long as we recruit ourselves and implement it correctly. And the nice thing about mining is that if the government pushes it, maybe as soon as 2 years or at most 3 years, they can become productive already. And then the revenues can start flowing. Let me tell you, 2 mining companies that were stopped during the previous administration, previous to the organization, when there was a ban on mining project. Tampakan in Cotabato and in Negros, the one of Pangilinan, I forgot the name now, but they expect to generate in revenues combined, I think, as much as $800 billion to $1 billion yearly. And they are close to starting to operate. And that is something we've given away because now the other thing that I'd like to talk about mining is not too many people know it, but there was a no-go zone established during the Aquino administration. I understand, I'm not sure, without consulting the DNR, it was submitted directly to President Aquino, where 80% of the total area of the Philippines is a no-go zone. So that stops mining in this area. And the no-go zone includes areas in the mountains classified as tourist area as the basis for the no-go zone. That has to be reviewed because there are areas where there's a lot of mineral but cannot be touched.
Okay. What GDP growth rate do we need in order to manage efficiently our debt obligation?
The conventional number is supposed to be 6 to 7% growth. I think that's a World Bank number to jump from underdeveloped or least developed to a developing country. If you have 7%, I think like India has had 7% or more for the last 10 to 15 years. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 5 to 10 years that really allows you to grow. And mining, like I said, if you just bring it up to 5%, that will add so much to GDP growth.
Well, the former Speaker of the House, Joe De Venecia, had this 7 for 7 years.
Exactly.
7 for 7.
He was much aligned.
Yes.
But Joe De Venecia,
that was 20 years ago when we trumpeted that slogan, 7 for 7 growth rate in GDP for 7, consistently for 7 years. If I remember correctly, his slogan. It's good to hear. It's good to hear. And it's good to hear that we know where the growth will come from. And you said basically agriculture and mining. In this last few years before the pandemic, we were growing already at 6-7% or 7%, almost regularly every year, 6 to 7%. But of that 7%, what percentage came from OFW remittance?
I'm not sure. I have looked at that, but it's probably at least 100%. Just remittances.
It's not that significant.
It's not significant.
But given the circumstances we were in,
yes.
OFW remittance had a great impact on consumption spending.
I remember the crisis of 83 when we ran out of dollars. The crisis of 89. Unlike Mexico, Argentina, who could not import anything and nothing to buy, the Philippines continued to be able to import and the economy kept running. There are two reasons. one, OFW remittances were important. Number two, according to a former U.S. ambassador, so many Filipinos in dollar accounts abroad. So to keep their business running, they brought in their data. So we had as bad a crisis as Argentina or Mexico. They stopped running. The Philippines never stopped running.
Okay. Now, Julian?
I'd just like to make a comment on the other instances. It's been a remarkably stable flow of inflow of foreign exchange. I was here during the 1997 crisis, got over the remittances. It never significantly slowed. It never significantly slowed in 83. It never significantly flowed during the pandemic. One of the interesting things is the structure of your remittance flow. Your remittances come from North America, Asia, Middle East, Europe, and also the origin of it. It's not just housemaids, it's lawyers, engineers. So it's a very, very diversified source of remittances. It's a bit like a diversified mutual fund. In other words, one sector can go down, one country's economy can go down, but overall, all your remittances has been remarkably stable over the 25 years I've been. It's quite an interesting phenomenon compared with, say, Mexico.
Okay, I think it's clear from the discussion that the government is not bankrupt. Okay, that's very clear. The problem, or the incoming finance secretary has a different approach to managing our debt. In fact, he's not very much concerned. His answer is growth is the way to go in order to cushion the impact of any debt obligation. I think that is also very clear, which is different from the outlook of the outgoing secretary, who recommended suspension of the tax cap under the plain law, suspended for 2022 or 2023, and new taxes, VAT reduction, VAT expansion. I read his the result of his briefing a few days ago. Now, so agriculture and mining are two identified economic sector that will have to be shored up, where the growth would come from, and it depends, therefore, on who will be the alter ego of the president in the area of agriculture and in natural resources. No names have cropped up as of yet, you know. So that's something to watch. Maybe the incoming administration is considering everything. I'm sure they agree with the suggestion here that agriculture and mining should really be tapped to bring about additional growth in the economy. But how can there be growth if there is no equity? I mean, how do we make sure also that the growth in the economy will not just go to a few families or a few businesses, but the growth should also be shared by the masses of our people?
Joey, I think that growth should benefit all sectors of society. And when we talk about growth, that should be accompanied with a strong policy addressing poverty. Because that is the only way we could make growth equitable for all. And I think this is a tall order for the new administration, because poverty has been haunting the Philippines for a long time already, and it has to be addressed efficiently and effectively. And let me just go back to the migrant workers. Well, You will know that this was a stopgap measure during the time of the late President Ferdinand Marcos. But it would continue to be implemented by the subsequent administrations instead of creating jobs here in the Philippines, so that we can stop this labor export and stop also the social effects of this labor migration, for particularly on Filipino families and spouses and children. So I think another way of doing this was probably is for the new department on the OFW to study how we can contain the export of migrant workers and create jobs in the Philippines where they can be absorbed, both those returning as well as those who intend to go out. Because that should always be a stopgap measure which is long overdue to be overhauled.
Can I make a comment on that session? You know, the first OFWs were the Koreans. But Park Chung-hee, in 61, who was a dictator, mandated unknowns like Samsung, LG, Hyundai, Hanjin. She supported them with all the financing needed to put up industries. There was one objective: to create the jobs, as Congressman was saying, so that the Koreans would eventually come home. Right now, we are, I think, the second largest OFW community all over the world. Number one is Mexico, but only because everybody is in the US. But the Philippines now is the largest OFW community. That started under President Marcos and the father of Cruz Ope, who is now the secretary. And supposedly, I was talking to some Ilocano politicians a long time ago, that was discussed between the president and Cruz Ope and Ambassador Coco Morales, who was in the Middle East. That is an opportunity, but it was supposed to be a stopgap measure. But we, unlike Korea, we never developed the large industries to generate a lot of the jobs. That's why, until now, we have no choice.
So mining, bamboo economics, agriculture, they can provide the jobs. And of course, manufacturing.
Well, the Philippine economy is jump. You have agriculture, and then you get into service economy, but you never really develop the manufacturing sector. So until now, that's why we have a lot of imports. Like one commodity, aluminum products. You know, you import all our foil, aluminum foil.
Do you think we can get our act together? Because all of these things that we have been discussing have been discussed a long time ago, like agriculture, mining, service industry, manufacturing. The service industry is also dependent on manufacturing. You will have more services if you have more manufacturing. And of course, tourism is part of the service sector, but it's also very vulnerable to pandemic or any kind of emergencies.
With all due respect to Congressman Lagman, if you notice in the Philippines, there are some cities that have developed very well. And there's one key thing. They have young mayors. They're very progressive. And their fathers or politicians have sent them to business school, etc. And they're taking over as mayors. And there are progressive cities. So I
only know one. You can count in your fingers which of these cities are really developing.
Well, there are some, Senator. And I'm hoping and putting the President-elect in that section. Although 64, he's been exposed. So I'm hoping that, like I said, when he said industrial, agricultural activities and mining, maybe he really has the instinct and the feel. So, like Tennyson said, maybe a lot of good will come, even if people are wishing evil. And The words of Socrates, we should get together and wish him well. The secret of change is not to focus on fighting the old, but to focus on building the new. So we should suck it up, put aside everything, and pray and continue to the future.
Hope springs eternal approach. But Julian, I think, has
I'd like to go back to the starting point here. I think we all agree, I'm sure everybody in this room agrees, that growth is the answer. It doesn't take a lot of brains to figure that out. The question is how. I think we have to give great credit to the outgoing administration for providing three very strong pillars for longer-term growth. One was the tax reform that was put through. I don't agree with every aspect of it, but basically it's a major accomplishment for any government in any country to push through tax reform like the outgoing administration. Second, it is pushed through. It didn't get constitutional amendments through for easing liberalization, easing foreign investment restrictions, but it did push through the Foreign Investment Act, it did push through the PSA, it did push through the Retail Sales Liberalization Act. All of these have opened up the country in the image of the world as well as its substance for foreign investment. That was the second pillar. And the third pillar, it addressed the infrastructure issues of this country and started to build. So we've provided with the outgoing administration a base for growth. Now, we come to the point of this discussion. Are we going to change some of those? Are we going to reverse the taxation and increase taxation now as opposed to doing what we did? Are we going to stop the bill? Are we going to become more protectionist on foreign investment? Because those are the three things that we fundamentally need. There's one other thing that would be a great help to growth, and that was opening up this country to free trade agreements. We have the RCEP, which is right now hanging in the Senate, I believe still. That needs to be ratified. There's a CTPP, the Comprehensive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the administration's indicated an interest in. There are various other agreements. By opening up your free trade, you will be opening yourself to more markets. It doesn't mean people just sell here. It means you can sell preferred rates to the other countries. And that is the fourth pillar that really needs to be. Then you get to specific sectors, agriculture and mining. I mean, you can have all those things. If you suddenly put a huge tax on mining, you're not going to get growth from mining. If you suddenly put key protectionist restrictions on agriculture, you're not going to get growth in agriculture internationally. So I think when we talk about growth, we have to look about these pillars, and then we have to look at each sector, how it's being managed. And I think this country has great potential in agriculture, great potential in mining, great potential in manufacturing. And it's got to be open for international trade, it's got to be open for foreign investment, and it's got to have the infrastructure to make this possible. We have the base, we just have to take advantage of it in the future rather than stopping it or turning it off.
Can I add on the taxes? Whether you like Donald Trump or not, he cut taxes. And the top 500 Fortune companies, the profits went up so much because they could reinvest. In the Philippines, surprisingly, after train and create, the Philippine companies are growing, not obscenely, but they're making a lot of money and creating more jobs and pushing more investment. So, historically and electronically, you can't cut taxes now. Increase taxes, with cutting taxes, you can say promoted the growth of the industry. Now, Julian's point, many of the Asian countries are now getting free trade agreements individually with other countries. We have not been doing that. One of the policies, well, one of the problems with the Philippines is policy of the previous administration, university, the CAPMI administration, carte blanche. One of the most effective programs dating back to I call Apo Marcos and Romano, was the creation of a lot of export trade zones. And that brought in a lot of investors, created a lot of jobs, increased the tax base. That has gone out of favor. Vietnam is doing all it can with incentives and creating export free trade zones to get those coming from China who are afraid of China dominating the world so much. I don't think we have gone into that a lot, but that was a very successful program of the previous Marcos administration. Look at the FTA, prepaid terminal. That used to be buildings for export industries, medium industries. I was a banker to a lot of them. At that time, there were 100,000 jobs in that area alone. And that has been lost. So that is one
Well,
program.
we've been removing incentives being given to locators.
Yeah. But
That's one of the proposals also of the outgoing administration to reduce or eliminate these incentives.
you may need that to let them come in first. Later on, to report the voice. But the report to that was told to me by a politician. Actually, very 85, almost 90-year-old politician, dating back to the Marcos era. He said it's simple math. If you have none of those, that's zero.
Between something and nothing.
Yes,
better
and if you
than something.
multiply it even by 10% only, 0 times 10% is 0. But if you have 100%, giving jobs, etc., the tax rate of 10% will give you 10. So I think it's just a matter of math. Of course, we let them come in, create jobs, etc., and sooner or later, the incentives run out, you need to collect full taxes. But you have to let them come in first.
Okay. Maybe we can have now questions from the members of the media, please.
We have one
Approach the microphone.
yes, please. From and we have our friend Radio Studio.
Good morning, gentlemen. My brother from the you've mentioned about the growth. I'm just curious on what can you say about the proposal of taxing the digital services as part of the proposal for the incoming administration to increase taxes. Do you think it will make an impact? Taxing digital services for digital services.
Social media. Well, let me put this way. According to the Oxfam, that's the Oxford Committee on Family Relief, every 30 hours, a billionaire is born due to the windfalls coming from the pandemic. And at the same rate, 1 million people are exposed to the extreme poverty. But this rising profit and rising poverty are two sides of the same coin. Now, I think we should be able to tax more of the rich, particularly those who profited from the pandemic pain. If they got billions or billions from the pandemic, they should be able to ease the suffering coming from the pandemic by paying the correct and adequate taxes. And so, what are these sectors? One, the pharmaceuticals. Two, those engaged in power, as well as in food. And together with these are the delivery carriers, the diagnostic centers, the internet, both Facebook and Twitter, as well as what we call hospitals who profited from the pandemic, including the distributors of medicine and medical supply. In other words, they profited from the pain of the pandemic. They should be able to pay adequate tax. that is where your question would rely on taxing some particular services. And to my mind, it is high time that we should be able to collect correct taxes from those who profited in windfalls or profited from the pain of the pandemic.
Sir, follow-up question.
Can I add first to what Congressman said? You know, there is an ongoing problem now with certain countries imposing taxes on digital it's fair because it makes a lot. The problem is operationally. The payments are not caught because it's online, transfers, etc. Now, I was talking to some IT people abroad, and the proposal, and what can be done, is to make sure that all payments must be forced through institutions, banks, finance companies, etc., where the payments can then be captured and withholding tax can be imposed. Now, the billion transactions every day, I do not the banks can handle that. Now, the other proposal, which maybe a little more takes a lot of will, is the old net worth method sensor. If the brother of Senator Lina does a lot of his business with online payments, and his wealth grow from 5 billion to 10 billion in 1 year, then his net worth increased by 5 billion.
That's if. Sample of if.
Sample only.
His brother was one of the first bankers of his brother, and I know where he started with transfer forwarding, and he's now a billionaire. So if his net worth increased so much, I mean, individuals or corporations, then we can impose what we call this a net worth based percentage as a windfall profits tax. But I don't know how easily that can be installed. But it can be done, you know, very clear. If the guy had one Ferrari this year and next year, you know, it's another Lamborghini, his net worth will increase. So you can tax him. You know? But there's a lot of difficulty in imposing, you know, especially gambling winnings, because they use what they call this the underground banking system.
How about the issue of patriotism, nationalism, love of country, you know? All Filipinos should think about this, you know? Voluntary payment of taxes, you know? Especially right now that the country is...
Honest system. Honest that these are the transactions that you entered into. This is the payment that you received. Therefore, you will report it as an income, and then whatever is the tax rate, and apply it. That's very. That's very.
I tell you, sorry. I moved to Canada in 2005, and they want to call it declare foreign assets, etc. So I talked to a major accounting firm and said, how can we do tax avoidance, etc. Because you can report your assets, and when you said it, at the basis you can refund. Yeah, it's exploring a finance guy. And the Canadian partner told me, Mr. Alcantara, how will we be able to pay for all the free services like healthcare, etc., etc.? That is patriotism.
Yes.
Sir,
I was embarrassed.
So I know the answer to your question is it can take a lot of doing before you can concretize a law that will tax digital transactions. No? So,
okay. Clarification po regarding the answer of Congressman. So, Congressman, do you think we are not taxing properly those companies who profited a lot during the pandemic?
I don't think so. Because they always try to find the real income and state their taxes. But let me tell you, this is a worldwide phenomenon. Oxfam calls it profiting from pain, the pain of the pandemic. So the government should be able to really investigate, check very well who really became billionaires or millionaires because of the pandemic. And we are talking about those engaged in power, food, pharmaceuticals, delivery areas, diagnostic centers, hospitals, and those engaged in the distribution of medicine and medical supply.
Thank you, Cong. Just to clarify again, or just to put on record regarding the question of digital services or digital transactions. So it is a problem on how we do it, the taxation, or the taxing on those aspects. No, but the impact is. Do you think it will make an impact?
Well, you know, all these high-tech guys are some of the richest in the world. Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, etc., PayPal, Peter Thiel, they're all billionaires. Even Amazon is digital, the same. So there must be a lot of taxes imposed on them. And like I said, the congressman said, you know, we have to find a way to do it.
Yeah, let me call our friend from ABS-CBN, Mr. Warren Guzman.
Good morning to the panel. To Congressman Lagman, could you describe the allocation for tax payment, for loan payments rather, interest payments, for loan payments this year, already allocated, and would you be knowledgeable of how it will grow for the next 5 years?
Well, as far as the debt service is concerned, it's still within the tolerable limits as compared to the GDP. But most of these debts are automatically paid because of the presidential decree imposed by the late President Julian Payne. I think with respect to the principal payments, they are automatically allocated. And with respect to the interest payments, they are in the General Operations Act, but still they will have to be paid because of our apprehension that if we do not pay, we will not be able to borrow some more, and our credit standing will be affected or dependency.
Yes, thank you for that call. But I wanted to ask actually in terms of percentage to the total budget, has it grown to a large portion of our budget already? How much are we spending every year percentage-wise?
For that service, I can give you an estimation. Yes, it has been lowered considerably. I think it's in the vicinity of about 20%, 20% of the national budget. And that's still a huge amount, which would go to social services.
Exactly, sir. And will that remain at 20% in the succeeding years, just based on your knowledge, or will it grow to a larger portion of the budget?
Well, I would expect that it would be.
It's a percentage every year that matures.
Pinapahaba yung utang.
So just to be clear, 20% of the 5 trillion peso budget, that's what goes to debt service this year, and then you expect that percentage to go up next year and in the succeeding years. What's the ceiling, do you think? But judging again from your knowledge of seeing the debt payment schedule or the amortization schedule, where will it peak at? Do you think it's going to be like 25%, 30% of the budget?
There is no arbitrary ceiling with respect to debt service. You know, shortly after Edsel, debt service was in the vicinity of 60%. And it was really huge.
Edsel what?
Edsel. When we say Edsel, there's only one Edsel. Edsel. The rest are surely Edsels.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I have another question, if I may. This is regarding to what Mr. Alcantara said earlier regarding the speakership. Do you think you're expecting a green light for mining moving forward? How will that help in terms of the industry?
Well, like I said, not a in line with a reasonable process where we can increase the share of mining. The President has said this for responsible mining. One of the things that scared the block of miners in the mining communities in the last election was there was a proposal that the first thing they would do was receive EO 130 issued by President Duterte, which said determined that mining could be an impetus for economic recovery. Mining is now only 1%, despite the fact that we are the fifth most mineralized country in the world. We have untold wealth out there that we will tap. So I expect that the DNR will implement responsible mining, accelerate it, and a mining project in 2 to 3 years you can make it produce already revenue. So I expect that we should go up. In the 70s, mining was good. Mining, sugar, and coconut were our main exports. And talking about budgets, there's been only 1 year where we had a surplus, 1974. I think there was 1 month under the Duterte administration where we had a surplus. But in 74, bago lang Marcelo, disiplinado lang ng tao. We had the budget surplus. So it can be done. It can be done with the right thing to do. So
Yeah, just to follow up on that also, but President Duterte actually walked back some of the policies that were stopping mining already. So we already have some of the larger projects moving forward. So what else are you expecting from the Marcos administration to help mining, really pick up?
Well, maybe culturally, Ilocos is a hard-scrabble land, narrow strait between the mountain and the sea. So I'm sure the President-elect knows how hard it is to make a living. And so with that in mind, I'm sure he will push to make livelihood improve. Mining is one of those. I hope and I pray he follows up on that. He stated that in his campaign speech.
So what, like a more budget or more freedom, or what do you want from the?
Bringing the people like Julian to bring more capital. Like I was saying, maybe we can look at the Indonesian model. They just passed a law that allows mining to be 100% owned, but with a time bound, between 5 years and 10 years, I know exactly, you must divest part of it. By the time they will have made enough money already so that they can then, in fact, when they sell the shares, they will probably make a windfall also because it will be more valuable.
I think it's a mistake to talk about walking back from what the government did in mining. They didn't walk back to the old days. They opened up mining, socially and environmentally responsible mining. There were certain new regulations put into place, and so on. So the expression of walking back suggests going back to the old days. That's not the case. In fact, just recently, the department issued a departmental administrative order about guidelines for socially and environmentally responsible mining. So I think we need to look at it not as a step backward, but actually as a step forward to environmentally and socially responsible mining. That will also benefit your economy. Thank you.
Sorry, I was referring to President Duterte actually allowing open pit mining and some of the things.
No, I understand that. But that's not necessarily walking back if you have proper environmental and socially regulations. I mean, we've moved forward over the years, and so it's not a backward step.
Right.
That's an assumption, which is incorrect.
Okay.
That's actually a forward step.
So,
Because open pit mining is internationally acceptable. But in Australia and Canada, the two biggest environment mining companies, there's a lot of open pit. They rehabilitate it once in time. But that's where the big bucks will come from. It's so easy to mine, less costly for open pit, and you produce really much more revenues than underground mining. So to say that it's a step back is, I think, a misinterpretation of the objective.
I was just taking away some of the hurdles that they put in before, in the early part of the Duterte administration, when they put the ban. Okay, so I have another question regarding revenue. Is that all right? There was a quote from a tax expert just last week regarding how to improve our revenues, and he basically mentioned that we don't need really any new revenues. We just need to improve the efficiency of the tax system. But one thing he said also specifically is the government or the people need a good example. And he said that he made an open appeal to the president to settle his unpaid estate taxes. So can the panel comment on that?
That is what we call improving the tax administration. And this will include, one, improving tax collection efficiency. Two, addressing the tax loopholes and rationalizing the tax exemptions. Three, you have to improve the policies on catching the tax evaders. Then you have also to address smuggling, which dilutes tax collection by about 250 billion annually. This was way back in 2018, to be more than. So these are all part of tax administration, and also you have to impose correct taxes from the rich, particularly those who profited from the windfalls of the pandemic.
Our friend there, can you come up here and properly introduce yourself and your media outfit?
I'm from the business bureau and also with the NGO.
Yeah, are you Rene?
Yeah, okay. I have 2 points, one on mining, on the other on taxes. Well, on mining, you see, in the 1960s and 1970s, the Philippines became the biggest copper producer in Asia. And in the 1960s and 1970s, Japan became the biggest world exporter of copper-based products made of copper coming from the Philippines. So my point is, we keep saying responsible mining. Is it not possible to transform that slogan into responsible, value-adding, job-creating industry, instead of just saying responsible? It's just, and we have seen what happened to Marinduque mines. You see, I was with Secretary Alcala. I think we saw the damage that was created is still happening. Anyway, on the second one, on taxes, you see, I think the incoming finance secretary is very lukewarm to the idea of imposing new taxes, especially for the ordinary people, and I think I like that. But I'm just wondering whether we can change the language on taxation. Whenever they talk about tax reform, they always think of adding new taxes and collecting. Is it not time to review the taxation system, because it's very regressive? And so the way forward for tax reform should be transformed into a progressive one, meaning those who are capable of paying should pay more, rather than, you see right now, most of the taxes are the revenue is coming mainly from consumption. And our GDP is right now 75% consumption, thanks of course to the OFWs. Now, in relation to tax reform, can we add also this proposal of the Nagkaisa Labor Coalition and the Freedom from the Coalition? They advanced this last year, wealth tax. And maybe this is not the, wealth tax is not a, was articulated in 2020 at the height of the pandemic by the IMF itself, international. In one of their policy papers, they said a country should explore the idea of having a wealth tax. And then I think Italy already adopted some policy in relation to this. Now in the Philippines, in 2020, at the head of the pandemic, the super rich, according to one report based on the Forbes list, their wealth increased by almost 30%. And so, what is that? So, why don't we explore this idea of this labor FDC idea of having wealth tax? Because this incoming government really needs all the money for stimulus spending. Especially, he mentioned that he wants to reduce the price of rice to 20 pesos a kilo. He cannot do that without doing a lot of stimulation in the area of agriculture. Thank you.
To respond to the thing of mining, that's a big debate because we have one of the highest effective tax rate, Julian tax, compared to other countries. So that is a disincentive also of mining. So the increase of taxes, like I said, the experience all over the world is cutting taxes stimulates business growth. And it's not just the big guys who make money, it generates additional employment. So, because the emphasis is on growth, the expectation is that more money put in the hands of the private sector will probably be used to generate more expansion in business, which means growth. So that's a big debate. Now, the wealth tax, that's a big debate in the US now, and in some European countries. France at one point wanted a 75% tax rate. So nothing has been resolved yet. Of course, the wealthy will go against it. But I don't know how the government will react to the proposal. It hasn't gained traction in countries like the US about the wealth tax. But that's really related to the network method, where if your wealth increases so much, then you have to pay your fair share for that. With respect to, again, if you go back to agriculture, one of our problems in this country is good programs get put aside the moment there's a new administration. I tell you, the 11 industrial projects in Lagman were 200 megawatt Tongonan project was put up to support 11 industrial projects. Only 2 were put up, Pasar, the copper smelting, and the Kilpos for the fertilizer. We import 48% of all fertilizer. And the copper, we don't do any processing, we all send it to Japan, Marobenis and the rest. But that was supposed, there was also a plan to put up an alumina refinery and aluminum smelter, but that didn't push through because it was put aside. I don't know if it's politics or what, but that could have been, if those 11 projects were put in, that would have helped manufacturing in this country. One other thing, people forget, if you remember Senator Masagana 99, the rice drive, it actually allowed us to have a surplus rice for a few years. You can look at the website of the UP Rusbanos, the UP professors will say it achieved increased production with a 90% debt collection in the support to farmers. But then, as it moved on, implementation of the plants, the technicians were replaced by non-technicians, the supervision and collection went down. Collection went down to 35%, and production went down. But it was, in the words of one UP professor, it was a rousing success. So what is my point? If you put a program properly structured, properly supervised on a large scale, it can work. And now we're importing rice so much higher. Because I'm not sure, but I think you only do 20 kabans per hectare, whereas Vietnam is anywhere from 40 to 60. And we have exactly the same kind of weather, but the policies are not in place. So maybe we should review the things. And what makes me hopeful is you know, that was the Marcos program, but it worked. It was put up in 73. And in 74, it helped give us a surplus because we didn't have import rice anymore. But it was phased out, I think, around 84 because the implementation and addressed it.
Sir, can I just call historical footnote? You see, in 1980, 81, 82, the World Bank and the IMF already came in when the debt crisis exploded. And 1978, 79, Jerry Siegel and Cesar Virata were trying to assure the public there's no problem about the rapid accumulation of debt, simply because the economy will grow, similar to what some people are saying now. And that the economy, when it grows, then the debt will be sustainable. But it did not happen. And so in 1980, 81, 82, the IMF, the World Bank came and they imposed these structural adjustments. And I happened to read a memo of Bong Tangco, the Secretary of Agriculture. He could not sleep in 1980, 81 because of the imposition of policy by the IMF and World Bank. Get out of agriculture, stop this subsidy. You see, the Masagana 99 you were mentioning was successful from 1973 to 79, mainly because you see, it was an integrated approach. You have this PMB providing credit, people riding on bicycles, together with the seeds, together with the little cash. It was integrated, and then you have Conrado Australia, and then you have this pre-cooperative. That's the success of that. But all of a sudden, it was cut by this IMF World Bank structural adjustment. Get out, and then 1982, Marcos launched this major industrial project, but it was too late. 2 decades behind Park Chung-hee that you mentioned, because Park Chung-hee pursued it in the 1960s and 70s. But you see, because then the IMF World Bank, Mr. Marcos, you cannot do that 11 industrial project. You have no money. And then the answer of the technocrats, well, we will have joint ventures. But so they collapsed, except of course this you have the successful energy program of Velasco. And so the point I'm making is, in the 1970s, there was a streak of economic nationalism on the part of Marcos, but it was just a streak. He kept relying on these technocrats who kept borrowing. Then eventually, when the debt was unpayable, then the IMF and the World Bank came in and they started dictating theirs. Remember that we went out of IMF supervision only under Gloria Macapagal in 2007. We are no longer under the supervision of IMF, but for 3 or 4 decades, under the supervision of the IMF. Thank you.
I think that's a very good point you raised, comparing the 1980s to the present. But I think the situation in the 1980s was that the debt to GDP ratio was much higher than it is now, and the reserves were, frankly, there were hardly any reserves. You know, the situations are not exactly comparable, in the sense that today, in 2022, the debt to GDP ratio is about 65%, which is quite different than it was in 1980. And secondly, the reserves are, I think, about 10 months reserves right now, which again is quite different from 1980. So I'm not sure it's good to compare the two and draw the same conclusions as to what would happen. Just a comment.
Well, you know, the success of some programs that are directed at growth seem to have worked, and we can do it again. Like any business, if the programs are not properly implemented, then it will fall out of the way. But you have to remember, in the 80s, the U.S. under President Carter had gone into a deep recession. And, you know, if the U.S. catches cold, the whole world catches cold, Now, if China catches cold, the whole world will catch cold. So it was a very difficult time for us. And we were, those were at the same time, the Argentina crisis, the Mexican crisis, not just us. So it's not fair to think that the wrong things were done. The situation was different. Now, at least, hopefully China will bounce back and the US will bounce back. So it's a more positive environment for growth.
Which, with regard to the first point raised by Rene about responsible mining, it was saying it should be value-adding, job-creating, etc., etc. We export nickel, we export copper, we export chromite, all in the raw stage. I think the point there is to process this so that the ones who will really benefit are the Filipino people, because the value added from the raw material is much, much higher when we import them. So the ones that should benefit most should be the Filipino people. So should that be included in the definition of responsible mining, that the miner should not just rely on the wealth coming from the raw material, but must increase the value of the material.
I agree with you, Senator. In fact, as a former chairman of the Philippine Industry Association, we talk about it. But there are systemic problems that must be addressed. Number one, power is so expensive in the Philippines. We pay about 550 to 650 per kilowatt hour. Indonesia does 250. So they are now into processing and exporting. Number two, our nickel grade is a little lower than Indonesia.
I'm talking just one mineral, whether like copper.
Yeah, all of them. Power is a major consideration because processing is power intensive. In fact, a processing plant will require you to sometimes put up your own power plant. Now, that has to be addressed. One of the things we discussed before was when you put up a processing plant, make it competitive. When they put up a power plant, give them incentive. No VAT on importations of coal or whatever. For the electricity sold to the processing companies so that they can sell it at a lower price. Let them connect to the grid and sell at commercial rates to the community, allow them to make a little profit. So those are systemic problems that have to be addressed.
But they're not insurmountable.
No. In terms of financing, if assuming this was classified as a climate change project, not many people know that there is a facility in the DNR, those software for climate change, which nobody is aware.
So we can explore that.
Yes.
We can explore that responsible mining should also include.
Processing.
Okay, Julian has something to say about that.
Yes, the concept of value added is a continuum. The mineral ore is in the ground, it has no value added if it's not taken out. The moment it's taken from the ground up or excavated, it's involving labor, value added. So at the moment you actually uncover the ore, you've got value added. In most cases, there's a second step of value adding, and that's concentrating it. Nobody ships out straight ore with little bits of gold in it. They break it down and try and concentrate. And it's the second stage of value added. What's being talked about is a very valid concept. There should be more stages, but there's many stages, not and that. The second thing is, the mining companies are always the best companies to do value-added processing. You actually usually have maybe sometimes a separate company, and maybe this is a place where you talk about a lot of capital in the Philippines available. Maybe it's available to do processing here. There's nothing to stop Philippine investors from investing in processing plants here to buy the ore directly from. But the mining company itself actually is at least almost always will use two
stages of value added. It gets the stuff out from the ground, and secondly, it gets some degree of concentration. Both of those generate a lot of employment, it generates taxes, and it brings something to the Philippines. We could get more, but the question is who and how.
Yeah. Our friends from GMA Center, sorry, please come forward.
Good morning, sir. I'm Henry Stipuna. I come from All Nation Broadcasting Corporation. My question is on address to Sir Julian Payne. I think the industrial countries have outgrown already the responsible mining mantra. They have been already into responsible fund management in relation to gas and oil and mineral funds that have been sourced by the government fund business. I have a friend, Miss Manila, who happens to be a country director of a Barrick fund. It is one fund of the Canadian Oil Fund, which is now outsourcing here in the Philippines, soliciting investors initial investment of 70,000. That means if I am investing to Barrick funds, I'm investing to Canadian oil, and you can use the fund on your mining industry in Canada in exchange for a good rate and interest rates. Another one, I researched the world best fund management relating to gas and oil is Canada and Norway. I found one tourist here in the Philippines from Norway, and she said, I came to travel here because of my government's social amelioration from the gas profit of the king. It means that they are responsible fund management aside from responsible mining. How can we benchmark, sir, the Philippines? We have Malampay gas, which is until now have been questioned upon.
What's your question?
Yes. We want to benchmark the responsible fund management in relation to gas and oil.
Bruce?
Like I said, I stay intermittently in Canada. They have what you call, Julian, an income trust fund, where even migrants can put money in it. But the income trust fund is directed at developing and the income trust fund has a lot of incentives, I think tax, pensions, etc. That puts together the fund. Maybe that's something that you can look at here, but it is through the financial institutions, so that gives confidence in the investor. But I still believe that there's enough capital lying around in the Philippines, it's just a little shy. So if that's the case, then maybe we can allow investors to put in funds like that. The returns were very good in the income trust fund. And a lot of people invested in it. It was directed to be invested in things like mining. I don't think it's fair to benchmark us because we don't have the wealth of oil from Norway or the wealth of Canada from mining. And most of the population is to start trying to get back. So I'm not sure that we can say that the Philippines should also do like Canada.
Yeah, I would like to invite to my office. I am doing a freelance PR to my company, who happens to be, we have been awarded by President Duterte a certain gas and oil deposit in Mindanao. But we are, of course, need Kapihan.
You can give your calling card to the people.
Another question, sir. This one is not so sexy for you men to answer. Another business line that we have is into health and wellness. It's like a underpart of Department of Natural Health. It is very famous in Canada. the practicing of naturopathy. Naturopathy. In fact, the headquarters of World Confederation of Naturopathy is based in Toronto, Canada. We just have an international congress, but it was hosted by Slovenia. Now in the Philippines, it is a sunshine industry, one of the affiliates of the Department of Tourism. That a resort type, sir. But it's health and wellness, the traditional, like the Hilo, the Lintusa, it's being regulated by the Department of Health under the non-medical. We have the record for this. My question is, and in fact I have a proposal with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and it replied. My boss ran for Congress, the ASAP 144, advocating for the Philippines to have a Department of Natural Health, CAPMI, Canada.
What's your question?
The question is, how can we, the Philippines, rebrand the health and wellness industry? Whether it be a capital, UK base, which is a breakfast, or a ispakan.
We will have another session for that. No?
It's not so sexy, but at least I will try.
Okay, yes. We will include that in one of the topics that we will have in the coming
Thank you.
We have other friends. Thank you. That's our friends from social media. Do we have questions from our friends from the business world, newspaper? Ready? Please come forward, please.
Hello sir, I'm Arun Atularia from Kapihan. Sir, about the Edsel, we know that it is made para po to invite more foreign investors. So because of this, they can have potentially more income for their companies. How can we make sure that this income will be reinvested in the Philippines so that the money would circulate instead of them keeping it and investing it in other countries? The create law, yes.
Talking about the create law.
Yes, I mean, it is made, I believe, for foreign investors to...
repatriation and reinvestment. We make sure that the profit is also invested, something like that.
Well, the create law is actually an incentive. It lowered taxes. It made this issue. In fact, one of the bottlenecks before was you have to get their approval for any merger or things like that. There's a lot of pending items there. Now, if you comply, you don't need to go to BRI anymore. Now, the repatriation is basically, if your retained earnings reach a certain limit, then you have to either reinvest it or you get taxed. So that's a way of ensuring that the government takes something from it. Now, the purpose of the national law on limitations is to make sure that part of it is local capital, Filipinos. But again, you have to balance that because there's a dearth of local capital. You may have, again, like I said, allow them to come in first, to develop it, spend the money, take the risk, and after some point, when the business is stable making money, then you sell it to the stock market or the locals so that the Filipinos then start benefiting by themselves. So it's not a zero-sum game. There has to be some game so that you can take a little later. But you have to get them in first into the country.
Yes, thank you, sir. Another question for Mr. Julian. About you said a while ago that the RCEP about opening free trade, it can give it can open the Philippines to more markets. How about the local producers? It means more competition for them. So some of them are complaining because it would force them to lower their prices and somehow get like malugit sila.
That's a good question. I open this RCEP because Canada is not a member of RCEP, and another free trade agreement. If it were to be Canada-ASEAN free trade, it would mean that basically Philippine products can enter Canada without virtually any tariff. Right now, they have to pay a tariff. Right now, so basically, it's not a one-way street. A free trade agreement allows Filipinos to trade to the other country at lower or no tariff, and vice versa. So it actually provides opportunities for those who are competitive. Right now, if you don't have a free trade agreement, Philippines is at a disadvantage in trading to Canada because you have to pay a tariff, which Indonesia or Malaysia or the Philippines or Thailand doesn't. So that's one thing. Now, yes, but most of there's not that many tariffs in the way. We've done studies, and for example, there is right now no free trade agreement that covers the Philippines and Canada. None, zero. If there were one, whether it was a CTPP, or whether it was a Canada-ASEAN free trade agreement, or whether it was a bilateral Philippine-Canada treaty, then the Philippines actually benefit as much as Canada. So it's a two-way street, two-way door. Now, the inefficient companies in Canada and in the Philippines will suffer. The efficient companies will make money, and they will compete more successfully against the competitors in Indonesia, Vietnam, and these other places, where right now you are at a disadvantage. That's the issue of free trade agreements. Okay, it's not just a one-way, but there is a cost. If you're inefficient and you're not competitive, too bad. But the others will become more competitive because they won't be facing the same tariffs in Canada.
Yeah, we will have the last question.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Sir, about the, let's say, build program, what do you think is the better way of funding it? Is it ODA or public-private partnership?
PPP. PPP?
Yes, PPP or ODA.
Funding the build. Is it ODA or direct government spending or PPP?
Well, direct government spending is pump priming the economy, which is important when the economy is down. I think the BBM program, the stimulus is also do that to immediately pump prime the economy to grow. Anything that is equity, like the PPP, is better than debt for any business. ODAs are treaty, they're soft loans, low rates, etc. But you have to make sure that projects are there because we're paying a lot of commitment fees for ODAs that are never spent. And that's why the BBM is important because they have to coordinate with the other government agencies so that when we sign ODAs, it goes to an implementation right away. Because if you look at the government, in the past administrations, we were paying fees for nothing because they were never paid. Let me give you one example. Many years ago, when I was in banking, we had a private textile industry. The World Bank gave us $120 million loan for textile millers to modernize. Thailand did the same. In Thailand, they completely obeyed to implement modernization. I don't think the 120 million for the Philippines was never obeyed. So we don't have a textile industry now. So that's a problem with ODAs. And in the DNR, there is a program now, ODA, for climate change, which can be used for projects, including a bamboo plantation. Until now, I understand there has been no availment. So implementation is very important, and that is why the lineup of people that President-elect Bongbong has put in place gives me hope, because these are experienced people with track records. So, like any business, people are critical. Whatever you say, the implementation is critical. So the people he has appointed so far, so good. Maybe things can improve.
Thank you, our friend from social media, and that will be the last. So can we ask for parting shots from our guests?
Well, it's 11:40. Congressman Edsel, you mentioned about the stimulus package that is not included in the 2022 budget, and therefore there may be some problem financing this stimulus package. Is the incoming administration, based on what you have heard, interested in pursuing this additional stimulus package?
Well, they have not withdrawn the idea of having a stimulus package, which they have monitored as BBM. But I think they have not told the public how they are going to fund this stimulus package. There are certain constitutional restraints because the stimulus package is supposed to be a special budget or a supplemental budget, supplemental to the DAA, and then the national treasury would have to certify that funds are available, or in the stimulus package there is a revenue measure being proposed. But in order to avoid this constitutional requirement, the stimulus package can be embedded in the 2023 General Appropriations Act, where there is no requirement with respect to availability of funds or the new tax measure. But we will have to wait, the government will have to wait for another 6 months before the stimulus package is put in place. But meanwhile, considering that 90% of the national budget is being released, that would have the effect of a stimulus package, because in that budget release, we have the infrastructure program, we have the build initiative, as well as adequate funds to address the remaining pandemic problems.
Your party words.
Well, we are hoping for the best, and I hope that the new government would be able to address these fiscal and economic problems, as well as some of the negative legacy it is inheriting from the Duterte administration.
Julian?
Thank you. I first came to the Philippines in 1989 for a visit when I was Vice President of CEDA. I came to live here in 94. This country has come a long, long way from the disastrous situation it's in 1989. I think this country has huge long-term potential. The biggest challenge is we're in a global world and you have to be competitive. No country is an island, even if it is an island. You've got to be competitive, and that means you've got to be open, and you've got to be efficient. And I think that we're on the way there. And if we can keep going in that direction, this country is just going to go up and up.
Thank you. Good. Thank you.
You know, as a long-time banker, I deal in numbers and facts and documents. But at my advanced age, as I get older, I'm taking a more philosophical view. And we all have to get together, move forward. We have the capacity to think through and get solutions. That's why one of my favorite quotations, even when I was president and CEO of banks or investment companies, I repeat Socrates, the secret to change and progress is not to focus on fighting the old, but to focus on building the new. So we should, you know, all the events of the past, you can say, you know, in the Japanese war, although I was still at war, Filipinos, these are patriotic Filipinos, had to serve the Japanese government. Jose Laurel, Benigno S. Aquino, Claro and Recto. Aquino was the National Assembly Speaker, Laurel the President, Recto, Foreign Affairs. But right after that, historical reading, they talk about them as collaborators. But after a while, they became great politicians. The son of Benigno Aquino became a senator, his widow became president, and that has been forgotten. Martial law, that's too long ago. There's nothing we can do about it now, whether you agree with it or not. We must put it behind us and move forward. So we should all get together. And I think one of the reasons the campaign of the BBM was so successful is he offered hope. You know, the man in the informal settlement area doesn't understand investors will come in, we'll have more jobs, etc. But when you tell them there is hope because we are united, they understand that. It's like, I'm sure the ladies will pardon me, it's like cosmetics. Cosmetics sells because it gives you the hope of being beautiful. And so unity helps because it gives you hope. And, you know, I went to Canada, stayed there a while, but I always intended to come back and I'm back because, again, patriotism was mentioned. We are still Filipinos and this country has great potential. And I'm really hopeful that the new president-elect will unite us and that we should also respond and be united and move this country forward.
Well, the challenge that our country is facing is bigger than any individual challenge. And therefore, in the long run, we should think of the interest of our country more than the interest of each individual. After all, what happens to the country affects all of us.
That's why I said we should.
With that note, we can now conclude this.
Well said. And before we part, let me just announce that Kapihan Salon Hotel, the corporation with the San Social Media Broadcasters of Filipinas Incorporated, will be a regular thing every Monday here at Manila Hotel, starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. So we are inviting not only conventional media reporters, but of course, as the organization says, this is Kapisanan ng social media broadcasters of Filipinas. Please spread the word, and if you're more interested about the organization, we have trainings offered for free for those who would like to transcend from social media bloggers into traditional media and so on and so forth, you know. This coming, the next Kapihan, which is supposed to be June 6, we'll be skipping that, Senator, because we have our first Bamboo Summit at Dimaras from June 6 to June 8, no? And the next Kapihan will be on June 13. So we would like to invite everybody, and we'll send you the advisories through your emails, through your cell phones, and all other ways that we can inform you in advance about the next topic that we're going to discuss. So, maraming salamat sa lahat, no? Thank you very much, and see you on June 13 here at Manila Hotel.
May gusto ko sabihin.
As the new administration embark on an economic roadmap to uplift the economy as well as the people's health, which were devastated by the pandemic, there should be a background on rule of law and constitutionalism as well as protection of human rights and respect for legitimate dissent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, our friends.
Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat. See you on June 13.
You will be very much